right, hello and welcome to LinkedIn Live Leaders in Conversation, a series launched last year from B-Lab US and Canada, where I get to speak with leaders in the B Corp ecosystem who are working to transform our economic system using business as a force for good. My name is Jorge Fontanez. I have the privilege of being the CEO of B-Lab US and Canada, one of 7 sister organizations that certify B Corps around the world. Today, we're excited to be back with our first installment for 2023, also to honor Black History Month by inviting a leading voice in our movement, Tynesia Boyea-Robinson, lovingly known as Ty, to speak with us about her new book, The Social Impact Advantage, a call for companies to win customers and talent by harnessing your business for good. Let me tell you a little bit about Ty before I bring her on. As an entrepreneur, Six Sigma, Black Belt, and technologist, Ty helps businesses achieve their true potential through social impact. She has been religiously leading and writing about enterprises that do well and do good for over a decade. As president and CEO of CapEQ, which she founded in 2011, she demonstrated how business and community goals can align towards mutual outcomes, helping Fortune 500 clients like Carlyle Group, Marriott, and others change the way the world does business. In her previous role as Chief Impact Officer of Living Cities, Ty was responsible for ensuring $100 million of investment produced outcomes that improve the lives of people across the country. Ty is going to speak to us today about equitable impact and help us begin a dialogue about the ways in which we can close the racial wealth gap. And in her book, she's asking 3 straightforward questions. How do you make your money? How do you spend your money? And how do you invest in your people? Before we dive in, I also want to ground our conversation today in a land acknowledgement. Today, I am benefiting from the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape peoples, commonly referred to as Philadelphia, where B-Lab is headquartered. I invite you also to take a moment to reflect on the land that you reside upon and historical harms done unto Indigenous peoples. At B-Lab, our vision and mission is to create an equitable, inclusive, and regenerative economic system that works for everyone. If you've been tuning into prior conversations, you hear us talking more and more about the term of a stakeholder-driven economy. We define this as one where businesses create value for workers, for customers, for communities, and also for the environment. And also shareholders, but we're going to talk about shareholders in a moment too. It empowers business leaders to make responsible and sustainable decisions that take into consideration the impact that they have when they create value for their business. At B-Lab, we're committed to doing that by scaling the tools and best practices of our business leaders. And we want more and more companies to learn from what B Corps are doing. So today, with Ty's help, we will focus on the competition for customers and talent and how we can begin to create equitable impact through the way we operate in our business models in order to get closer to that vision. In Ty's words, rather than focusing on short-term profit for shareholders, we have to think about total value add for all stakeholders. This is Ty's definition of a stakeholder-driven economy, so that we might look at the quality of life of workers and the well-being of the people living in our neighborhoods and in our communities. Before I tee off our first question, please know that we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. So please go ahead and ask your questions through our conversation. Turning to you, Ty, welcome, first and foremost. Tell us about what brought you to this work. What inspired you to write this book, The Social Impact Advantage?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jorge. Thank you so much for having me. And when I think about why I wrote this book, when I founded my company almost 12 years ago now, this concept of B Corps, B Lab, the B movement was really nascent. I think it has been around for a couple of years before I launched. So when I was telling people that I believe that business could be a force for good and that our vision was to change how the world does business, people were looking at me like I grew at least two heads, or at least didn't know how business worked. And it's so encouraging to fast forward, a decade plus now and see that this conversation is front and center for so many organizations. Also to see the growth of B Corps across the world, not just the country, showing the model and the example of what's possible. And that said, we've been working directly with companies and investors for that period of time. And we still see people who are new. They're new to this as a concept. They're overwhelmed by what it takes to actually move in this direction. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to meet them where they were. So as someone who's been working with these organizations for a while, I wrote the Social Impact Advantage in order to make sure that there was accessible, straightforward content that could help a beginner who was just starting on this journey, embedding equitable impact. And for us, equitable impact is the intersection of the integration of diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental, social, and governance. So those two are hand in hand.
I am curious to hear even more about how you've observed the landscape change. And so you heard me talk about the stakeholder-driven economy. And I want to stay focused here for a moment, stay grounded about what has changed, especially in the last decade, as you've said, because we too over here at B Lab have seen amazing demand for B Corp certification, right? So yes, we are now over 6,400 B Corps globally. US and Canada continues to be the largest around the world of B Corp communities, but the UK and Australia and New Zealand have exceeded 1,000 in their regions and growing fast as well. You, in your book, introduce what you call the holy trinity of capitalism. And then you go on to say, on a broader economic scale, equating profit and value is deeply flawed. I want to know what you mean by that, because I certainly we have evidence that more and more companies are seeing the value of adopting our framework of certification. What has changed in the last decade, Ty, in your view?
Well, I think in many ways, and this might be sacrilegious for some who are really hardcore capitalists, but I think in many ways, Milton Friedman's adage, the business of business, is actually wrong and very outdated. And so there are several market trends that are happening right now that are pushing businesses, regardless of whether or not they're B Corp or not, to pay attention to both impact and equity. So first of all, there's $30 trillion of wealth changing hands from people who are used to the Milton Friedman way of doing business to those who care about how their money lands, where it lands in communities, and whether or not it's making a difference. You're also seeing that consumers are not just paying a premium for products and services that are actively not just neutral, but actively doing well. And you're seeing that it's difficult to recruit people, particularly millennials, to the workforce if you don't have a social purpose either somewhere embedded in your business model or at least living those values in what you do. And so you're not actually running a good business anymore. And frankly, I would say even from back in the day, if you're not really focused on these goals. And I think it's not enough to just be marketing and brochureware. We're also seeing that consumers are sniffing out when things are inauthentic. And so they really need to see it as built into part of your DNA. And I also like to kind of push back on this notion of business is profit at all expenses. That's a more recent phenomenon, particularly through globalization and some policy changes we've had in the United States. If you really think about before World War II, businesses were very connected to their community. They would invest in their workers, they invest in the neighborhoods around them. And so this concept that capitalism has to be at the expense of others is actually false. And so when I think about it as the holy trinity of capitalism, it's really simple. It's about a business owner creating something of value, making sure a customer is actually getting value from that product or service, and that you're investing and treating your labor first with a living wage to be able to take care of themselves and their families. Those three things held in equipoise, that's the holy trinity of capitalism.
Okay,
And so
all right.
it's really about getting back to that as a concept.
getting back to that. Okay, I love that you're saying and more than suggesting, you're telling us that in fact, philosophically, our economic system was not meant to operate the way it's been operating. So you said we need to be building into companies, into their DNA, a way to integrate these approaches. So your book is all about creating a competitive advantage. You are speaking the language of business. Talk to us about how companies take this approach to embrace social causes and invest in impact, not just profit making.
Absolutely. I think before I get into that, I just want to clarify the way that Americans have leveraged capitalism has been extractive. So I don't want to in any way say that that is not the way that the system was designed initially. It was designed, if you go back to your land acknowledgement, on the backs of Black and brown people and on stolen land. So we can't take that away. But that said, capitalism in and of itself as an economic model does not have to be extractive. And that's why I
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yes. Let's not ignore the historical context. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
But if you think about what it takes to make it a competitive advantage, it can't be something that's a side hustle. It's got to be the main dish, not the parsley on the plate. So you have to really think about all levers of your business. And that's why we go to how you make your money, how you spend your money, and how you invest in your people. So how you make your money is really about anything related to your core business model and how you generate profit or revenue. How you spend your money is about what are you spending on it. Everybody has to buy everything from paper to chairs to computers. Are you using that spend in a way that's actually uplifting communities? And also how you invest in your people. I think lots of times when people have thought about diversity, equity, inclusion in the past, it's about butts and seats, and it's got to be bigger than that. It has to be around, are you making sure that there are benefits that are aligned with the needs of your workforce? Are there people in positions of leadership and power throughout your organization that are diverse? And so those are the things that you have to do to really make it a competitive advantage. It has to be core to every aspect of your business.
I have, you're reminding me of my days in working in multinational companies and, being often frustrated by procurement diversity initiatives that, only went as far as opening up portals for companies to become part of the database, but often it was just challenging to go further and have dollars actually being spent, right? So you're actually pointing out one of the ways is to make those processes easier, to reduce the friction and we might say the red tape of what it means to be a supplier for especially larger companies and multinational companies who want to work with women and minority-owned businesses who are, already doing good work and have other certifications that they're proud of having achieved as well. So, Ty, I want to go to next because we're a partner in this work. You've been working with us over here at B-Lab, CapEQ in particular, helping us create the scope for our racial equity impact improvement program. And I want to highlight something you said earlier because we believe that one of the first steps of this work is to educate business leaders in a learning journey. Our role at B-Lab is to integrate and implement and play a role in which we engage and educate our business community, i.e. B Corps, on principles that will help them build racially equitable and inclusive business practice. I've been saying how I envision a future where business practice and activism become one, where we're actually, achieving these outcomes and this impact by not seeing the difference, as you say, between how a company operates and the impact that it has on the community. And we want to do this while supporting entrepreneurs of color with resources needed to measure, manage, and scale their business practice. So you're a principal partner in the development of this good work. And I want to thank you for getting us here. Tell us more about the program development, how it is being shaped, and what participants should expect from the program.
Absolutely. Well, this cohort, we're really excited to see it. It's been a labor of love over the last couple of years, and it's built off of work from the 2021 CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity. So if you think about the social impact advantage is really talking about the levers that you need to pull in order to get to equity. So that's the how. If you think about the CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity, it's the what. What will be different in the world if we're building an equitable society? And so it's really about making sure that business understands that you will change not just your company itself, but you will also change the communities within which your company resides, the industry, because of the way that you're operating differently, and then at large society. So that's kind of the ultimate goal of it. It was built off of that. We also had partnered with the White Men for Racial Justice to actually deliver a lot of this training in the past to a group of white male CEOs who were focused on racial justice. So we've worked on operationalizing it in different communities. And so what I love about this version of the cohort is that it's really drilling down into practical experiences. So we've already had a historical background on really working on this work with other groups. And now B-Lab has been really intentional about bringing in subject matter experts on each one of these focus areas. So whether it be making sure that you are providing benefits in a different way, like income advance, or what are the things that you need to do to switch your board in a way that's more equitable. So you kind of give the macro level, this is what the world would look like if it were different because of equity. And here are specific subject matter experts and tools that allow you to do that immediately in your day-to-day practice.
I love that we are already getting to what companies can do. So thank you for getting us there. And I want to talk about how companies can move beyond commitments to taking action. So the summer of 2020 yielded a lot of corporate commitments on racial equity with varying degrees of follow through. It's top of mind again for us in this Black History Month, and where we're seeing companies, that have made pledges really still struggle years later to make real progress against those commitments. So yeah, how do companies go beyond? What are you witnessing? Where are you witnessing real progress?
Well, Jorge, I think it goes back to what you were saying before about your experience. And I had a similar one in Fortune 500 companies. When I've said before that it can't be bolted on, it has to be built in, this work. And I think the reason why the statements have fallen flat in so many ways is when it really takes to build a company that's equitable means that you have to think about, how are we being equitable in supply chain? How are we being equitable in pipeline? How are we being equitable in board? How are we being equitable in our business model, our sales service? And so the scope
so many
of
opportunities.
Yes, the scope of that is really broad. So you can't just go out there with the statement. You actually have to have a pretty intensive strategy across all levels in order to do so. And I also see that ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion have been separated for so long that people have kind of kept them in silos. And so I think that's what it's going to take to move beyond statements. It's not something you can do in 3 months or even 6 months. It has to be a long-term strategic plan. When I think about the models that I know are working and that I'm excited about, I think, Jorge, you have a lot of examples in the B Corp community that I think would be great to share, if you don't mind.
I can absolutely share a couple. So one that I definitely want to highlight is an initiative called Change is Brewing. It's a new limited batch ice cream flavor from Ben & Jerry's, which includes cold brew coffee from one of our B Corp certified companies, Black and Bold, a Black owned B Corp dedicated to helping youth in need. And so Ben & Jerry's has been really aligning its advocacy to encourage more consumers to support the People's Response Act, which is to enhance policies and organizations that are boosting Black communities. We also have another example with Bombas, the Black Hive Collection, which builds off of the Buy One, Give One program and contributes to Black-led organizations working to reduce homelessness in their communities. The tech sector also has been receiving a lot of, I would say, backlash given the challenges it's having with retaining its workforce. But at Cyborg Mobile, a technology and management consultancy, their CEO and others are addressing the lack of diversity in the tech industry. And so this B Corp is providing a sustainable pipeline for youth to give underrepresented communities the opportunity to thrive in the tech market and giving them both the hard and the soft skills. So yes, we are seeing examples in our community. We do want to continue to lift those up. And thankfully, we now have a more formalized program to educate more B Corps into how to adopt those practices. So yes, these examples of B Corps modeling real change are compelling. The framework in which, or the ecosystem we operate within, Ty, we talk about ESG, right? That's short for environmental social governance. That's what B Corp certification is. It's a framework for companies to evaluate ESG. One of the things that I think we see criticism around is that there's been more of a focus on the E and the G, and we overlook the S. How do we create the roadmap to hold each other accountable? And are there metrics, are there measurements that we should be looking at within the social part of the framework that you would recommend companies begin to evaluate?
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the reasons why we always say equitable impact. The reason why people have avoided the S for so long is because the S is hard to measure and it's hard to deal with since it's really focused on the inequities that have existed for so long. So when I talk about measurement, I think it's people want to kind of focus on measurement broadly and everyone wants to measure the same things. And I think there are several things that you can measure that are consistent. So things around the diversity of your workforce, hiring, retention, and promotion across your workforce. But then when you think about the measures specific to your business, it should be at the intersection of the root cause of the problem your business is trying to solve, the values of your organization, and the unique resources you bring to bear on that. So let's say you're a transportation company, you're going to have more measurements potentially on the effects of transportation in your business model metrics for around social, particularly around unfair and biased impacts in communities of color, potentially through environmental issues, versus if you are a consulting firm, you're going to have a different set of metrics that you're going to measure. So I think that's kind of the way we should look at measurement. I think the way you hold each other accountable is the ones that are shared, we all be on the same page on, which I think B Lab does a really good job providing the frame on that. And then you hold each other accountable at the industry as well.
So I'm not sure that I'm shifting gears here, but I just want to maybe just pause on this point about the evolution of DEI in our space. You know, since the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, I feel like I have observed a real shift in the way we talk about this work in company boardrooms. You know, we're not just talking about diversity, in my opinion, and I'm thinking about your comments around improving and creating a more diverse workforce. Important, critical, you know, essential for companies to figure out how to attract and retain talent of color. How can we go beyond this, though, Ty? I want to just hold space here for how do we think about hiring Black, Indigenous, and people of color talent in a way that doesn't look like we're creating quotas, but rather that we're creating cultures of inclusivity?
Well, I think one of the major goals is to step back and make sure that you're centering the needs of the communities in which you're serving. And the first community you serve as a business is actually your employees. People think it's the customer, but the people you touch most immediately and most frequently are the people who work for you. And so many times, take something like benefits. So many times benefits are structured around white cis males, right? So what do white cis males need? And if you kind of really pull back the layers on that, even what do white cis males need who overwhelmingly have their wives at home taking care of children? Like this is the model that most benefits packages are working around.
Right.
When I think about some of the work that we were really excited on, and I know you have a partnership with them now, we worked with FSG on this work called Talent Rewire, which is really flipping on its head things like benefits, things like how you bring in people for pipeline. So, you know, one thing that I mentioned before, income advance. Why do you need income advance? Well, oftentimes frontline workers and low income workers are one paycheck away from a major emergency. That doesn't mean they're not solid workers. That doesn't mean they're not talented. It means that they have a different set of needs. So you saying, hey, I have a great 401k plan with matching, that's great, but I'm worried about what am I going to do when my car breaks down? And then what happens is the ripple effect is if you do have a major catastrophe or disaster, which every human does, it's not just low income people, example,
Right.
you have less of a room for those shocks. And that means that turns into turnover. And that means you're more likely to get fired. So a benefit like income advance, which actually allows you to advance some of someone's paycheck in light of an emergency, keeps them in jobs, keeps them retained, and allows them to get over that challenge. And also the repayment rates on that have been amazing, and they don't have high default rates. So that's just one innovative way of having a benefit that's centering the needs of the community that you're serving most, which is your employees.
Great examples. Thanks for lifting those up. I mean, your comments I want to just underscore, what we know, which is 40% of Americans live in poverty today. This is across the racial spectrum. And so when we talk about exactly this data point that you mentioned, and companies look at their responsibility and opportunity to break the cycle of debt, of the challenges that are caused by emergency situations. Yes, let's look at income advance. I know we've been part of conversations recently about how we create funds, where maybe we don't have to pay that money back. So policies that look at the most marginalized employees or workers in your company are the ones that will work for everyone. And I think that's my takeaway from your last example. All right. Ty, so thank you. We're going to open it up for questions and see what we get. And depending on the flow, we might have more to talk about too. So let me check in on where we're at. Yes, here is the first question, Ty. What value propositions could someone approach a CFO with to suggest a path to benefit corporation or to B Corp certification? So we're talking about a few things here, I think, right? We're talking about what's the value of B Corp certification that a company might derive. And then we're talking about a particular stakeholder, which is the CFO, who can hold a lot of influence on whether or not a company invests in the process of certification. Do you have a perspective on this, Ty?
Jorge, I feel like I should start with you since you are the CEO of B-Lab, and then I can sprinkle from that.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely start. So I think this is a really important question for us. One is a lot of companies come to us already believing that they are doing more than the average business in their sector. So what value does B Corp certification have? I would say first, if you're a B2C company right now, there's growing interest across, amongst the public and customers in particular to decipher which companies are doing better and trying to make a decision at shelf, for example. So retail is one opportunity if you're in a consumer packaged goods environment. The supply chain is also big business, and it's I would in some ways the holy grail for this work. So when we're talking about the stakeholder that is the CFO, I think the conversation has really shifted from risk mitigation strategies, which is, we need to protect our business from climate change risk or, other issues, risk related to social issues that our company might be impacted by. But, beyond that, it's important to understand how a company's own supply chain can also create value. And that's a different kind of conversation that I think the B Corp assessment, or I should say the BIA, the B Impact Assessment, gives employees an opportunity to have a dialogue with their executive, CFO, and others about the ways in which that the BIA points to areas of improvement. And that's what the certification does in practice. What's your view, Ty?
Well, one of the organizations that we've partnered with, this is Athleta, which is a well-known B Corp, and we share examples about them. So when you're thinking about pulling the levers of your business model, sometimes what you have to do is acquire an organization. So if you're a large enough company, you can do so. And the Gap acquired Athleta, and what they started to see in their financial performance is that Athleta was outperforming all of their other brands. And there's a reason behind that. I think the B Corp certification is not just a marketing signal, it's also showing something about the way this business is being run is different. So Athleta, because of the social mission mission has a rabid consumer base. They are committed to them, they stick to them, and their focus is on making sure that they're empowering women and girls. So they have a stickier consumer base. They're outperforming compared to their peers, even within their own parent company. And they were outperforming in the retail industry. And this is year over year when the retail industry was down. So it's an example of, not just what's happening micro for your individual company and your CFO, but showing the data that compares how B Corps perform and often outperform their peers. And I think oftentimes CFOs are like, well, is this going to be really expensive? And I think that's a false choice. Companies spend money all the time on marketing, on innovation, and on R&D. So it's really about, is this going to have a return on investment? And the data overwhelmingly says yes.
So there are companies large and small that have best practices that we can learn from. One of the best examples, not best examples, one of the examples that I use a lot, I'll say, is one in which Grayston Bakery, that is becoming even more well-known for its open hiring practice, has influenced larger companies like The Body Shop to adopt similar practices, providing, reducing the barriers to employment, and in response, or some of the impact of adopting those policies has been reduced turnover in the workforce, increased productivity and morale. The intangibles related to the kind of value that these practices can create for a company. So I think this is a question for you, Ty, based on that example, because someone in the audience wants to know how their turnkey inclusion program that was created by a very small team could be evangelized in the world. Where do they start? How do their best practices get shared with more companies so that what they know, those seeds of knowledge, can actually influence larger companies? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, we're a small company as well. So I think one of the things that I've been really proud of running CapEQ is that many people think we're much larger than we are. We punch above our weight class. And a lot of the way that we get our word out for things that we've built is we do it in partnership with others. So the CEO improvement cohort is a great example. B Lab has a strong brand, a really wide influence and reach. It's really well respected. And so I'm not sure if you remember, there used to be these commercials where they would sell Dell computers and there would be a bum, 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 and that would be Intel Inside. And I like to think of CapEQ as that. And it's like we're kind of the Intel Inside, if you will, in a lot of our partnerships. And I think, one of the things that's really important with a partnership model is the lived experience that so many of us and you have who are listening to this and who are creating these tools is actually the nuance that's needed to get to these solution sets. But so often we don't have the scale to get to the table in the same ways. And if we think about that in a partnership way, and it's really authentic and mutually beneficial, that's a way to get those words out there and get more people bought in than they would necessarily if I just said it was CapEQ.
That's right. Okay, B Corp certification and CapEQ Inside. These are big takeaways for many people listening today. I want to lean on you, Ty, for the next couple of questions. One, including a comment, which is that in our conversations, we not leave out those with disabilities and barriers of accessibility in our conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I would just want to acknowledge that some of my comments today have been largely about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and we also live in the intersection. So appreciate the comment from whoever shared that in the audience. As we think about DEI practices, there's a related comment and question about how companies communicate the mission, the impact of their DEI work, especially when we're talking about, I'm a certified minority women-owned business. I'm a B Corp. I've got CapEQ Inside, and I'm also doing some DEI stuff. How do we how do we communicate when right now it might feel really fragmented? And is there a difference in your mind? I'm going to add a question. Is there a difference in your mind about how you communicate to your employees internally to your company versus externally?
Yeah, so I actually do think there's a difference. So internally, if you care about DEI, it has to be front and center in what you do. And so when we're assessing folks on equitable impact, it's not just, do you have a statement, if we kind of think about beyond statements, but also, are your policies aligned with that? Is it consistent in your strategy and your strategic plan? Are people incentivized around issues related to equity? Those are the levers that are more tactical, that show that it's not just voice over at the top, but it's really at every level of the organization. Externally, that is a really personal choice. And so just to be blunt, at times people feel like, and historically it has happened, that if you lead with diversity, if you say, I'm a me-be-we-be, like I'm a minority business enterprise, I'm a women business enterprise, I'm veterans disability, that then you're treated as a deficit. You're not treated as an asset. You're treated as that group over there that's marginalized, and we have to do something special for them. And so there are a lot of people who care about diversity, who care about diverse work, who are themselves a diverse firm, and choose not to lead with that because of the historical issues of being marginalized. There are other folks who are like, I'm going to lean into that because we are assets and we are brilliant and there's so much we're bringing to the table, and me being upfront and unapologetic about my diversity and my team's diversity and the fact that it's a cornerstone of what we do is a competitive advantage. And that is a choice point, but you have to make sure that internally that is not a choice point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are good questions, and I guess complex and nuanced, as you've said a few times, that it really does depend on your company's practices to date and the culture in which employees are operating with. And then, when we think externally, one of the things that we hear a lot of people say is like, you have to be authentic, right? Well, what does that really mean? Authenticity means that, if someone were to kind of pull the cover off on your company, that they could actually look inside and see whether you've got CapEQ, CapEQ inside, or other practices that validate, what you're saying. This is what we might say goes beyond commitments. You come from the work of transforming cities. And so one of the questions up next is also about, how do we ensure that people who make a city livable can still live in the city in the future? And so some of the commentary around this is that making sure that people are paid a living wage and that they're able to actually enjoy the places in which they are part of the community.
Yeah, that is something that we work with a lot. So we've worked with real estate developers, for instance. The big mismatch on this, so one is livable wage, which is something that all companies should do. But the other issue is that oftentimes when companies are building or even cities are investing in places, they have a mismatch on the lead time. And what I mean by that is, if you want to build a whole new technology hub in your community, and it hasn't historically been a place where people who have known about technology, you have to work backwards from, how long would it take for me to train people to be ready for these new jobs that are coming? What partnerships do I need to put in place? Oftentimes it's 12 to 18 months before even the first shovel is put in the ground, but the real estate developers are often not thinking about that. The city is busy pulling together its taxes and its land use policy and is not thinking about that. And so oftentimes what we're doing when we're partnering with organizations like real estate developers, like folks who are focusing on innovation, is making sure that tax policy is in place so people's rents and mortgages don't go up when there's innovation in their communities, that there's education partnerships in place, and there's an upfront alignment of, these are the jobs that are coming down the pike, and this is how we train people on them. There's coalitions with other companies in the local area. How are we partnering together to make sure that we're pipelining people from our existing positions into these new positions so other residents can backfill those other roles? So there are very tactical, specific ways to actually make sure that communities are still livable beyond just living wage, but people have to be intentional about it and give themselves enough lead time to really make it happen. Otherwise, what tends to happen is they put up the new development, or they put up, build out the area and say, oh, we did a couple job training programs, what happened? And so that's usually where it breaks down.
Super interesting conversation, Ty, today. As all good things come to an end, we must begin to wrap up, but we'll have a few things to do to get there. We've just really, I think, shared the tip of the iceberg today, and if anything, you shared some really juicy tidbits of what folks can expect when they buy the social impact advantage, which I've been reading through, and I must say is not just filled with great insights, but really practical frameworks that any company can adopt right away. So where do we buy the book, Ty? Where do we go to buy the book?
I always recommend you support your local bookstore. And if you don't know what your local bookstore is, you can go to a website called bookshop.org. It will source books from there, but you can buy it on any place that you buy books.
Beautiful. Also a B Corp, so thanks for the plug for our community. Let me do a few things. First, thank you, Ty, so much for your wisdom, your generosity in sharing it with us today. And a few things to note for those of you that are interested. First, please look out and sign up for the Racial Equity and Climate Justice Learning Journey before March 3rd. And this is designed right now explicitly for employees of certified B Corp. So if you're one of those employees thinking about what I can do next, we'll be dropping the URL and registration for you there. We also have a similar learning journey for white men for racial justice. And this is also being sought for registration through March 1st. We'll be dropping this into the link for those interested. This is also designed for employees of certified B Corps who identify as white men. And two more invitations. If you'd like to express interest in our next 101 Learning Journeys offering, we're going to be sharing out the interest form with you, and also learn more about our Racial Equity and Climate Justice 101 Learning Journey experience and goals on our website at wearebcorps.com. Thank you so much, Ty, for being with us today. Thank you for those of you who joined us and might be and listening and might be watching this recording. We look forward to staying engaged with you, and see you next time. Bye, Ty. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to see you.